Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining this. So I was asked to talk about mindfulness and resilience, particularly in these exceptional times, and to look at how are these times particularly challenging to us, particularly from a neurophysiological perspective, and how it affects our working life. And then also to offer you some tools and techniques for working at your best in this period. So to begin, so my name is Sophie Maclaren. I live in Jericho. I have for about 7 years. I'm half British, half American. That's mostly so you don't spend the whole time got my accent and if I'm Irish or Canadian or something. So I'm director of two companies based in Oxford. One is Estia Wellspace, which is a wellness center here in Jericho, focusing on kind of body, mind, heart approach to human flourishing. And then I also direct a company called Awaris. We're a global company headquartered in Germany, and we work on mindfulness, resilience, well-being, and kind of consulting for companies around the world. That's also the UK branch is based here in Jericho. I also lecture at Said Business School on the MBA, executive MBA, and other courses. And primarily my interest in my work is human flourishing. So understanding how any human being in any given context can live their best lives. And since most of us spend most of our waking hours and most of our living years in the workplace, to me, that's a really good place to start. So looking at any workplace context and understanding what are the opportunities for individuals there to flourish? How do you really succeed in that context for you as an individual and for the organization? And then at the same time, what are the challenges in that context? And I believe that we have enough insights now, particularly from neuroscience, also management and leadership studies and related disciplines, that we can really begin to connect the dots to understand how each of us can flourish in unique contexts. So our modern life already held many challenges, and now we've just added a few more. So let's look at the context that we're in now in terms of the pandemic and our context here in Oxford. So, already when I was working with companies, normally I travel every week and deliver deliver programs for different companies, law firms, banks, and things. Already, mindfulness and resilience were very relevant because already our schedules were full, people were juggling a lot, stress levels were high, people were feeling overstimulated by constant emails and text messages. Now there's been a pause on that, and there may be some, silver lining to all of that. It may be very good for us in some ways to pause that busyness. But we've also added a few more challenges. So the challenges of working from home and trying to blend work life and family life. Even things like simply remembering to constantly wash your hands and not touch your face and these sorts of things. There's an energetic expense to that, and it requires quite a lot of constant focus. And then things like, do we have enough supplies? And, then I find a lot of people in still, talking with companies regularly, a lot of people are feeling a sense of either isolation or the kind of stress of the uncertainty. What's going to happen next? We just had this great presentation from Oxfordshire County Council saying, here's how we're preparing, but it's a challenging time. And we all know there are a lot of question marks. We don't really know what's going to happen. And so those things all take a toll on us. And so it's not to say it's the end of the world and nothing can be done, but it is to say it's important that we just are conscious of this. And when we're conscious of that, we can say, okay, here's our context. How does it challenge us? And then what can we do to take care of ourselves within that context? So let's look very briefly, and some of you will know this already, but your brain and how amazing it is. So on the first day of the courses that I teach at Said Business School for the MBAs and others, I ask the students, okay, you work in a knowledge-based economy. What is your greatest resource in a knowledge-based economy? And of course, they think about it, they discuss a bit. And in the end, they always come up to, it's my mind or my brain. Right? And so we say, okay, so if that's the case, what is the value of your mind? And then they have to come up with a way of how do you evaluate that and so on. And usually what they realize is that this is their most valuable asset. So we say, okay, if you took that amount of money, however many millions of pounds they've valued themselves at, and you were to invest it in something, let's say a business or a property, how much time would you spend researching that investment? How much time would you spend understanding how that thing works, how you get the most out of it, and what can go wrong and how you can prevent that? So I think mindfulness in a workplace context is very much coming from that approach. Let's understand how we function as a human being, particularly how our minds and also our hearts function, so that then we can understand how we flourish and prevent things also going wrong. So your brain, the main takeaway from this is that your brain is amazing. So if you think every 1.5 kilograms contains on average 86 billion neurons, and then each of those neurons has 1,000 to 10,000 synapses. It means connections with others. Many scientists say it's the most complex thing in the known universe, the human brain. And it uses about 20 to 25% of the energy in the body. So why is this important to us? Because it means that everything you do with your mind has an energetic expense, which means thinking is not free. And when we become conscious of that, we can become more conscious about how we're using our mind, what we're paying attention to, and how we're paying attention to it, and so on. Amazing processing power, 1.5 petaflops. This is something like the processing power of all of the personal computers in the world until a few years ago. So pretty significant. This is your brain. And the performance of our brain is dependent on many factors, physical factors and also emotional factors. So what's key here is our brain is not this thing just sort of existing on its own, but it's completely, and also our mind, completely interconnected with the body and emotions. And so here we're saying the mind is sort of, the activity of the brain in this context. So, oops, let me go back. So if we look at working life, and I'm simplifying things a lot here because normally I would take a couple of hours to do this introduction. So we're just doing a little taster, key points. But if we look at performance in working life, we see that underpinning performance, generally these aspects here in the blue squares, your health, your resilience, engagement, drive, creativity, and collaboration. And underpinning each of those are key capacities which can be cultivated. So underneath health and resilience is our ability to relax and essentially go into states of rejuvenation. Engagement is usually driven by positive outlook. Drive by ability to be focused and pay attention. Creativity by our emotional well-being and our ability to have a clear mind and be innovative. And of course, collaboration is driven by empathy and our emotional intelligence, our ability to recognize the emotions and subtle communication of other human beings and to work skillfully with that. So in any workplace context, there's quite a lot of research now that you can make a very strong argument that actually our performance is driven by care. And care in a really conscious, intelligent way. So we know now, and normally when I work with companies, I'll do a 2.5-hour module on each of these green squares, that we look at the neuroscience behind those and how do you actually cultivate those capacities. So today I'm just going to do a short kind of mini version of that, just give you a couple of key points related to our situation now and some practices that you can do. So if we look at lockdown and your brain, why is this so challenging to us? Well, of course, there are many reasons, but if we look just in this particular context and in the time that we have, I think a good model for understanding some of the challenges is David Rock's SCARF model. There are several models like this that make a similar point. David Rock is a neuroscientist who works on the neuroscience of engagement. What he says is that the same neural responses that we have that have regulated our physical survival for a very long time, the things that drive us towards food, so that's thought of as reward, and cause us to move away from predators, are also triggered now in regulating our social survival. So what he says is that essentially our brains are constantly scanning the environment. And this is why we looked first at how amazing and the capacity of each of our brains. Brains are constantly scanning the environment, taking in tons and tons of data. And when something is flagged as either particularly good for our survival, we have a particular response to that, sort of leaning towards it, going after that. And when something is flagged as particularly bad for our survival, this is either physical or emotional, social survival, then we have a threat response to move away from that. And what he says we're scanning for are these 5 basic needs: our status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Status here isn't necessarily a hierarchical status, but it's more a sense that, let's say if we're talking about in our working life, then whatever job we're doing is considered important and respected. Certainty, right? Our ability to predict what's going to happen. Autonomy, right? Having some freedom, some say over things. Relatedness, we have a strong need for human connection and good relationships among the people around us. And then fairness, right? That things are just. And so the theory here is that we're constantly scanning and assessing these in any given situation. So now the situation with the global pandemic, it's easy, I think, to see how each of these areas are being challenged in different ways. Right? Many people have lost their jobs or are now furloughed. There's huge uncertainty, right, in a whole range of areas, with the economy, with our job, for some people living situations and so on. Autonomy, this is probably the first time in our adult lives that someone has told us, we can't go out and play when we want to. Of course, people are isolated, so relationships have changed. And now they're all online, which has a very different quality. And then the fairness is what's going to happen to individuals in different areas? Is there some equality to that or not so much, and so on? So, I think what this shows here is very likely a lot of triggers that push us towards more of a threat response. And without going into too much detail, in our working lives today, we function at our best when we're in more of a reward response. And so we'll look just very briefly, and some of you will already know these things about the autonomic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is associated with this threat response, fight or flight. And again, I'm simplifying things a little bit here for the sake of time, but just to give you the basics. So when something triggers us, like with this SCARF model, something feels a threat to any of those 5 areas, the likelihood is that it triggers a sympathetic nervous system response or activation. In that state of being, that's essentially survival mode. It reallocates our resources it's a system that was very good when most of the threats in our daily lives were threats to our physical survival, like something about to eat us, a tiger about to eat us or something, because it really shifts your energy towards the muscles to move. This is why it's fight or flight or freeze. But what that also means is that other non-essential high energy consumption systems are shut off. So things like your digestive system, immune system, areas of the brain like the prefrontal cortex, so areas that need more energy to function, are sort of downregulated. Again, I'm simplifying here. Whereas in a reward state, we're more likely to feel parasympathetic nervous system, which is more of a relaxation. It's called rest and digest. We see more activity in the stomach and digestive system. It can lead to a boost in the immune system in some ways. And then also cognitive abilities more available to us, particularly the cognitive abilities which are most useful in our working life as knowledge workers. So stress isn't necessarily a problem, that kind of activation, sympathetic nervous system activation, but lack of relaxation is. So, if we look at this, it's normal for human beings and other animals to have moments in the day where we're sort of a little bit more activated and then, go back down to zero. So if you watch, for example, gazelles in these nature documentaries, and they're all sort of hanging out pretty relaxed, it seems, eating. Then a predator appears and they have a moment of activation, everybody realizes and runs. And then when that moment is over, they just sort of go back to eating and they seem to go back down to zero. In our working life, what we find is that people aren't so much going back down to zero. Rather, there are these moments of activation and then it sort of subsides, but the pressure is high enough that we never get to have a full recovery. And that's where things become problematic. That's where you start to see more health issues, digestive issues, difficulty sleeping, burnout, and so on. So I also work on heart rate monitoring with some of my clients. So this is one client, and this is a typical day. The red here is sympathetic nervous system activation. The green is parasympathetic, so recovery. Most people spend most of the day with a lot of red. And you'll see not a lot of green throughout. And then what happens is even when they go to bed, it can take an hour or even a few hours before the system is able to switch gears into a recovery or relaxation mode. And then by the end of the week, people feel drained. Maintaining high performance, and particularly in a situation that we are in that is going to perhaps challenge a lot of these needs that we have for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness, and so on. What's really key is to be able to consciously relax from moment to moment. And you'll see this is a person who actually starts their day with some mindfulness practice. And then throughout the day, they have moments where they really switch gears. And so what's important to know here is you can actually do very effective, concentrated work in a state of relaxation. And this is something that can be learned. So let's do a 2-minute practice to conclude here. And this is a practice which has quite a lot of research behind it, thousands of studies actually in just in the last sort of 10 years. And it's a practice of consciously slowing down the mind, coming into the present moment, and also soothing the nervous system by breathing fully and by observing the breath. So let's just do 2 minutes together. So taking a comfortable upright posture. The posture is quite important. So sitting with your back upright. If you're too relaxed, if you sort of lay down or lean back in your chair and close your eyes, it will be a very different practice. So sitting up straight, relaxing your shoulders back. The spine is long and strong. The chest soft and open. The shoulders relax. The jaw relaxes. And then just turning your gaze downwards, and the eyelids can be soft, resting the eyes maybe a meter or two in front of you. And now turning your attention to the feeling of the body breathing. So the sensation of air coming in through your nostrils. Noticing the sensations of the rising and falling of your chest and belly. And even following your exhalation. As this now warm breath leaves your nose and mouth and dissolves again into the air around you. And inevitably, thoughts will arise, maybe physical sensations. And the practice here is just to notice that, but not bring them on center stage. So, keeping the main focus on the breath. Maybe there's a coolness, a freshness as you inhale. You might feel a coolness in the upper nasal cavity. And seeing if you can allow the thoughts to sort of dissolve and just rest the mind on the breath. And this will begin to happen naturally. Taking 3 more breaths like this. Feeling the chest and belly rising and falling. Okay, so I'm going to, well, I'll stop sharing in a moment. But just if we were together and we could all see each other, I would ask, or maybe you can even do it now just in the chat, just writing, what did you notice? What did you feel? And as you do so, just to close this is a practice that we know helps to calm the mind, create more clarity and focus, and soothe the nervous system. So especially if you allow the exhalation to be a little longer and smoother, very likely what you'll find is the body starts to shift into more parasympathetic nervous system relaxation. So here's a tool you can use to cultivate more focus, especially if you're feeling kind of fragmented, so better concentration, to soothe the nervous system, and essentially to be a foundation for your health and resilience.